Yeah, hi. What I want to do here today is talk about asymmetry. And I know we've talked about it before, but let's continue talking about it because I'm always getting input from people that they like asymmetry more than symmetry, or they like symmetry more than asymmetry. And that's like saying I like a hammer better than a screwdriver. Maybe you love a hammer, maybe that's your favorite tool, but try using it to unscrew something, a light fixture, something from the wall. It's not going to work. These are both tools. And we're going to take a look at when they are appropriate and when you might want to use them, right? If you love symmetry, I hate to break it to you, you're going to be a one-trick pony if you don't use asymmetry, as you can see here. And I'm just on Pinterest again. I think I'm looking at my board here, and I think we've seen this before, but you're going to see asymmetry is defined by thrusting dynamic movement. It's been very popular for a long time in graphic design, and you can see here going back to the Bauhaus. And we're going to actually look at some magazine covers, and we're going to look quickly at David Carson, Willie Koontz, a Swiss designer, typographer, and some magazine covers, and just see how these things are worked. But you can see that a lot of the things that surround you in life, whether they're CD covers or paintings, incorporate asymmetry. And if you think about it, for music, for example, if you're designing a CD cover, unless you're designing a classical music cover that's very formal, Bach or something, if it's anything contemporary, I tend to think you're going to be going with something that's a little bit more asymmetrical. Now, having said that, sometimes breaking the rules when people expect you to do something that's asymmetrical, sometimes throwing something symmetrical at them is, you're breaking the mold. That can be effective. But, when you're doing a search, sometimes you have to do different kinds of search categories. And again, here, what I want you to look at is, you can see here's a minimalistic poster. You can see this is symmetrical, right? Two globes, one on top of the other, a line straight down the middle, has that serenity, that timeless Zen kind of balance, right? Same thing on some of these patterns here. You can see in traditional designs or tiling, sometimes symmetry comes in, very handy. You can see here, symmetrical design, maybe some tattoo designs, some kinds of icons, logos, things like that, decorative elements. But when you get into, as you search down, I think it's just, I would throw it back to you and say, what do you see the difference in, in things that are symmetrical versus asymmetrical? Now, a lot of times what we're going to see is something that's kind of in between, approximate symmetry. And what we're going to see in some of these magazine covers maybe is something very common that I find, especially in labels, which is a symmetrical structure within which you put an asymmetrical element. Okay, but let's take a look. Willie Koontz, okay, he wrote a groundbreaking book, at least in my opinion, on typography and layout. And if you look at his layouts, okay, grounded historically, I think stemming from the Bauhaus, you can see, macro, micro aesthetics. I think you can see that even within the grid, okay, that there's a lot of asymmetrical, I don't want to say imbalance because it's balanced, but it's kind of differently weighted, okay? So asymmetry doesn't have to mean a mess. I think a lot of people that are into symmetry think, oh, asymmetry, it's not controlled or anything. Wrong. Asymmetrical. If you look at Willie Koontz's, go to his website, take a look at some of his layouts. He uses a grid and then cuts that grid up into different components, okay, that are differently weighted. Look at this, very dynamic, wonderful compositions, very structured. So if you're a symmetrical person, the good news is you can have a lot of fun, okay, with asymmetry. I would recommend using the grid, all right? Now, let's look at David Carson. This is somebody, maybe one of the most famous graphic designers of, I'm not going to say the 20th century, but of the late 20th century. With Ray Gun magazine, here was a high school art teacher who started designing ray gun magazine and a surf magazine, and he was catapulted to the front of the design world, and he has influenced things you see on TV, a lot of TV ads. And this is asymmetry maybe without a grid. I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't want to speak for David Carson, but his thrust was, one of his things was, type doesn't have to be legible to be read. He said you can take something that's very boring and make it totally legible and no one's going to read it, and you can take something that's very interesting and you can make it small type, turned over to the corner, all kind of broken up, and people are going to want to read it. They're going to turn around, they're going to turn their head, they're going to turn the issue, around and try to read it. So illegibility becomes in, broken up, distressed kinds of typography and layout. And again, I would have you look at this just to analyze it in terms of maybe somebody who has played a lot more loosely with the idea of a structured grid, the Swiss, structured approach versus the kind of, he's a surfer. This is a much more free-form, melodic, dynamic kind of approach. Now, how does this work commercially? Colors Magazine, great magazine that's been around for a long time. Very interesting stuff. And so I just picked it, off the top of my head. You're going to see in magazine covers, what you're going to see, I believe, is kind of a symmetrical approach to the bounding structure. Okay, the headline. Okay, and then a tight grid where they're going to put the barcode and smaller text, things like that. And then, maybe in a portrait. I think you're going to find a lot of portraits are very symmetrical, right? But you do have this little off-centered subheading. So this would be, maybe we could call this approximate symmetry, all right? And I think you're going to see a lot of that in magazine covers. Let's look at some more. Here's Dwell. This is an architectural magazine. And I think what you're going to see here, again, is that very nice kind of, not symmetrical layout, but the grid. They're going to use the grid. They're going to place their headline and their subheader. Notice the subheaders are off to the corner. If you were married to symmetry, okay, what you would do is you would center everything. For example, here you can see, the name of the magazine centered, right? And then under it, you can see the little subheader there, centered. But where's the subheader? Off center. So asymmetry movement. People, I think, commercially, even with something like Time magazine, okay, which was, maybe I was looking for something that was the most symmetrical approach. They do a lot of, they do a lot of articles on people. And like I said, the portrait. There's the portrait, front and center, symmetrical, human face, all right? The name of the magazine, behind it, here's the header there, right? And everything's kind of like symmetrical. But off to the side, additional information, approximately, or approximate symmetry, right? Let's take a look at another. Here the portrait's pushed off to the side a little bit. It's not perfectly centered. And then in that little space that they've made by pushing it over, they put the additional information. So again, I think one could make a case for asymmetry in graphic design or in communication in that it makes the eye move around. And you as the designer want to control the viewers, where their eye is going to land, where they're going to end up, right? And here's Rolling Stone. Again, everyone's familiar with that. The title itself is asymmetrical, right? But it's symmetrically located. It's centered a lot of times. And then again, here you've got the title, front and center, the portrait pushed a little bit over to the right, and then you've got the information kind of curving around. Asymmetrical, approximately symmetrical. This is starting to push it over into asymmetry, right? Look at these wonderful little horizontal visual breaks. And by breaks, I mean B-R-A-K-E, right? meaning they're slowing the eye down as they move around. So look at this stuff, right? Ask yourself, look at, here's another one, Rolling Stone. The differently weighted, right? Here we've got all of this typography over here to the left. And then what's balancing it out? A small, asymmetrically placed square. That geometry weighs as much as all of this loosely thrown in typography. All right? The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. I collect images that are interesting to me and that are just examples. For example, this would be a good example of asymmetry. Movement. Look at that. A lot of movement, moving in and around and through. You can see I collect labels. You can see here the symmetrical structure within which is placed some asymmetrical elements, right? A lot of magazine covers, postcards, the retro stuff, surprisingly, you can find examples of asymmetry and symmetry. I think if you go back, you find more symmetry back in the 50s. But you will find things like labels tend to be very symmetrical, right? Because they want that information in the grid presented to you. And it depends, again, on what you want to display for the product. But again, what I find is a lot of times there's a compromise. There's a kind of a symmetrical approach to structuring this stuff. And then within, you've got a fun little thing with some movement in it, a little dynamic, a little spice to the ad, right? So look at ads, look at wine labels, look at food labels, look at magazine covers, and ask yourself, again, here, look, the square, the rectangle, right? And then the ellipse. And then within that, the off-center blue heron, literally flying, the movement, flying out of that ellipse, breaking that, and this snaking around. So there's a lot of asymmetry in there. So take that into consideration. Think about what it is that you're designing, what it is you're presenting, whether it's a Time magazine, a very formal approach, presenting someone, or whether, and who that person is, a politician versus a musician, and then start pushing things around and seeing where they end up. And don't forget the grid, do your research, look at Willie Koontz, look at David Carson, look at some magazine covers, do your research, and then have some fun pushing some things around.